But welcome, Facebook viewers, and welcome to my special friends and guests. I'll introduce you all, and you can give a little wave so people know who you are. We have Amy Harder from the Denver, Colorado area. She's a kids pastor, puppet designer extraordinaire, extremely creative, and has a couple other cool projects going on in the background. We have Esther Moreno from Alabama, super energetic, although she's containing it right now. And children's pastor extraordinaire, and also really, really passionate about equipping people for kids ministry and effective kids ministry. We have Jeff Smith, the veteran with 30 plus years of ministry for children, creative, publishes several resources. We have JJ Graves, our YouTube quiet sensation. I'm just kidding. But the man behind Douglas Talks, kids pastor, and really awesome at just breaking down biblical truths in a way that kids and adults like me can understand. We have Christopher Sommerfeld, quietly equipping people in the background with lots of creative tools and puppets through his companies so that they can reach a new generation with ways that are tactile and kinesthetic. And I am your humble host, Gabriel Galdamez from sunny California. A giant Disney nerd and Disney and Pixar nerd. And a quick background about me, I guess, before we start, because I have another minute or so, is I started in children's ministry when I was 12. I was working with the 5s and 6s. So I was working in kids ministry since I was a kid. And I've also been involved in creative ministry officially since I was 11. My church had a puppet team, and that was a cool ministry at my church. You know, if you were the cool kids were part of the puppet ministry. But I was, really excited about storytelling and putting on shows and that kind of creative outlet since I was 5, using my bunk bed as a stage. No shame there. But I've been really blessed to have been really active in leadership and ministry for the last 10, 11 years now. I've traveled quite a bit throughout the country, as well as internationally, doing mission trips and conferences. I'm really, really passionate about equipping people to do ministry creatively and effectively. I think I did a workshop yesterday in Davis for a church, and one of the things they were talking about is that a lot of times discipline issues can just come from a lack of engagement from children. And I really think that if you're passionate and excited and trying to do things in a way that's engaging to the children, you won't have as much issues with discipline. There'll always be the exception to the rule. We know that in Kidman. But I'm really passionate about all of those things. And the Disney class, just to give you the background on this class, I've picked up my first art book. So they put out art books for every film that they create. Disney, Pixar, and a lot of other studios have started copying them. And I picked up my very first one in like 2010 for The Art of Up. And I read it, loved it. I started collecting them. I now have 50 sitting on my bookcase. It's a slightly unhealthy obsession. But I've always been really fascinated by the creative process. And I think reading about how these movies were made is really incredible. And just all the thought that goes into it that you don't even realize. And as I started to read more and more of them, I started seeing trends of, what a lot of the studios or what these studios were doing kind of frequently. And I started seeing the application for ministry, and that was really exciting. So I developed that into a workshop. I had 75 people the very first time I did this workshop in a room for about 35 people. So I was sweating like crazy. JJ was actually there. I think Christopher was there too. Jeff was there for like 10 seconds. But it was a lot of fun. And since then, it's become one of my favorite classes to lead. And it's probably one of the ones I get requested to do the most because it is a lot of fun. It's really interesting to look at the secular world and see what we can take from them and how we can apply it to ministry. So that's a little bit about that workshop. If you're watching us live on Facebook, and you're just joining now, I have some really awesome guests. They're here to just kind of contribute to the discussion. So it's not just me talking to my screen and feeling like I'm talking to myself more than is usual, broadcasting myself, talking to myself. So let's dive in. I'm going to share, I have some visuals up to help us kind of steer our conversation. And let's see. Here we go. Can you all see my screen? You can talk to.
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Is that too big? It's good size.
That's good.
Perfect. All right. So I'm going to ask Amy, if you don't mind, if you can read this slide or this quote. This is really going to be what guides our conversation and is really the structure of this workshop.
Nice. This is a John Lasseter quote. Create characters people connect with and tell stories that deeply entertain and move them. The audience will come and they will keep coming back.
Yeah.
That's so true.
Awesome.
This is a great.
Yeah. And for those of you that don't know who John Lasseter is, he was actually the guy, the quiet little animator that in the 1980s saw computer animation and he thought, hey, we could make a movie with this. In the same way that Walt Disney was the first one to see cartoons and say, hey, we can make a full-length movie out of this, John Lasseter saw the potential for computer animation and decided to run with it. And this quote, I feel like, really sums up the whole idea of what we can pull from Disney and Pixar. So, you know, we can call it a day, just go now. But we won't. Let's dive into stuff. So let's see. Oh, that's trippy. Okay, so the first thing we're going to dive into is creating characters people connect with. So let's start by talking about a movie. One of the qualities that is really important for creating a character that people will connect with is that the character is appealing. So I love all their movies, but we have the character of WALL-E. What can we think about WALL-E's personality, his character, his behavior? What can you think when somebody tells you WALL-E, how would you describe him? Anyone can chime in.
He's curious.
He's curious, yes. How do you know he's curious?
Because he's hunting through the garbage and he's always looking through it instead of just doing his job. He keeps getting sort of sidetracked and like, oh, this is interesting, and kind of exploring his world instead of just living in it. Yeah.
What else can we say about WALL-E?
He's innocent and adorable.
Yeah, super adorable. I mean, just the little eyes, which is kind of crazy that the way they animated that so that his little, binocular-looking eyes. I never knew binoculars could be so expressive. Right. He's innocent and adorable. What else actually makes him adorable and kind of endearing?
I would say curious first, but he's compassionate.
Yeah.
Caring and compassionate.
Caring and compassionate. What's something that shows you that he's caring and compassionate?
Well, doesn't he keep? It's been a long time since I've seen WALL-E, but doesn't he keep a little plant? Take care of a little plant that he's
he does take care of a little plant.
Yeah, and he wants to keep, and he's very tender with a little plant. Even though he's kind of like a bulky-looking square character, he's very soft and rounded. You can see that the way he looks at and interacts with the girl.
Yeah, and JJ, you said the cockroach. Oh man,
the
cockroach
even in that little picture.
Genius. Like, the way they thought of this whole, okay, there's, the world is falling to pieces and there's only robots left. But what could he have as an animal sidekick? A cockroach.
Yeah,
brilliant. And it just makes it so endearing. Just the way they did that. And we have some people saying hello on Facebook. So hello, everyone. Hello, welcome. So here's a little quote, and I'm going to ask Esther if you can read this quote for me.
Absolutely. All right. And move you guys over here. All right. Appealing. WALL-E was a Robinson Crusoe robot that you liked before you even knew what he was about. You knew he was the last robot on Earth working by himself. He could stop doing it, but he didn't know that. You immediately liked him. That's so true, because I immediately liked him as soon as I look in his eyeballs.
Yeah. And it was, it really is striking when that film starts, how, you just see this one little robot plugging away and doing these things. And that really is what made him so endearing, that they added these qualities. People talk about how he's hardworking. People can relate to that he was very compassionate, that he's kind of curious about the world around him. When he's kind of in love with Eve, the robot, how everybody's kind of like the whole montage of him going on dates with this, hibernating robot. And it's something that people found really appealing. And that's something that's really important for characters that either we're creating that are original or characters that we're talking about people from the Bible, and how can we amplify what's appealing about them? So if you think of David, what's appealing about David? Anyone off the top of their head, what could you say is an appealing quality about David? In any story, any example.
Oh my goodness. His beginning, he was a shepherd boy, he was kind of seen as the one unexpectedly, who was picked out, who you wouldn't even think. His dad didn't even think he was worthy enough to be what he became,
Yeah, and who doesn't love a good underdog? And that's part of it too. It's really amplifying those qualities about, you know, a lot of times people will just read the story as it is, and we don't really take the time to dive deep and think, okay, what is it about this person that makes it appealing? You know, you think of Moses, who did these incredible things, but when you look at him being called, he's like, no, I have a stutter, and I feel like you watch, you know, certain movies, you're like, oh, he doesn't have a stutter at all. But it makes him so human. It's not just, you know, this guy raising a stick and parting the Red Sea.
Exactly.
It's a guy that's human, that's flawed, and that sort of leads into the next.
Well, can I say something real quick about David?
Yeah, please.
And I think David and Wally kind of hit on the same note in that they are both childlike. I mean, David was.
Yeah.
So when we're teaching children, I think often we go to David because he was a child, and so we can use him to, you know, teach that they're the church right now, not that they will be the church someday when they grow up. And to a lot of the characters, I would say maybe all of the characters, main characters in Pixar and Disney, even if they aren't children, they have childlike qualities that to the kids. And I think that's important, not just that we have characters that are appealing and relatable and all that, but that they're appealing and relatable to children, because that's ultimately who we are serving.
Absolutely.
Love it.
And then sort of kind of tying into that, so moving from one spectrum where you have a character that's a little bit more childlike and innocent, then you have a character like Woody from Toy Story. So when we think of Woody, you know, what are qualities that we think about Woody? And I wanted to kind of hide this. I could do this actually.
I was gonna be so unprofessional and go get my Woody.
Please do. I do have a potato head lying around. Oops. But what can we say about qualities about Woody?
Well, he's the leader.
He's sarcastic.
The leader.
And I love it.
Christopher says he's sarcastic. What are other qualities about Woody?
He's
and when you think about the idea of relatability, what makes Woody relatable to us?
I think his situation is relatable, especially to kids. The changing atmosphere, the changing relationships. You know, Woody isn't getting older, but Andy gets older, and his friends make new friends, and things are changing, and he kind of has to figure out how to deal with that. I think that's totally relatable for kids.
Yeah. I mean, how many of us can really identify with that? You know, we are not toy cowboys, but we can identify with that feeling of, you know, being worried about being forgotten, or, you know, your friend gets a new friend and now you're worried that you're going to be, you know, not as important. And if you think about Woody, you know, he's sort of, actually we'll pull the quote up, and then JJ, if you want to read that one.
Woody wanted to be a sarcastic guy, someone who hides his very real anxiety about being forgotten in a sort of malice and wisecracking. Woody is the person who needs to learn the lesson of the movie.
Yeah, absolutely. And Kyle Chegwin, who's watching the live stream, just said he's jealous over Andy at first. And I mean, this quote really sums up that personality so perfectly. And how many of us can identify that, you know, sometimes the way we act out if we're worried about things isn't, you know, oh, you know, don't forget about me. Instead, we're like, I don't even care about you anyway, kind of thing. But it's very relatable. And if you think about Woody, like if you describe the actions literally, like, you know, oh, there's this guy that pushed another guy off, you know, off the side of a building. It sounds awful. In a movie, it's not quite as extreme, but they did such a great balance of making Woody, you know, very human in the way he acted and reacted to the situations around him. And when we're thinking about ministry and characters and the different ways that we could talk about people, it's really amplifying as well, making them relatable. I think one of the hard things sometimes for people with children, I found, when talking about Jesus, the idea of Jesus, that, you know, Jesus was perfect, Jesus never sinned, and people might think, well, I can never relate to someone like that. Maybe not a kid, maybe an adult would think a little bit more critically like that. Well, that doesn't relate to me. But I always make a really big point of emphasizing, you know, Jesus, you know, his parents didn't get him. They didn't understand what he was doing. Like, what are you doing out here? You know, don't you know I must be about my Father's business? Another thing with Jesus is, you know, he's doing all these wonderful things for people and he wasn't always being thanked. He has all his followers, you know, his close friends, they all desert him. One of them betrays him. That's something people can relate to. That's something that, you know, even a person, you know, our God, our Lord and Savior, that, you know, they might not seem relatable at first, but really finding those qualities or those situations that you can bring forward to help people understand and relate to it. Because when we think about Woody and Wally, you know, we're really rooting for them, and it's because they're appealing and because they're relatable. Anyone have anything they want to add there?
Yeah, the thing that comes to mind with Woody for me is he thinks he's got it all together, but he doesn't, and that's kind of relatable.
Yeah. Anyone else have anything they want to kind of chime in? All right, so here's my question, although it's more of a rhetorical question. How can we make our characters, or the people that we're talking about, more believable? Or actually, I guess it's not too rhetorical, but what would your first instinct be? Let's ask someone that hasn't talked as much. Maybe Christopher. You know, what are ways that you would think of trying to make characters, the people that you're talking about, more relatable?
Making them real. While we were talking about Woody, that's what I was sitting here thinking is they did a really good job with him and making him real, his emotions and the way he handled himself, and just the way his demeanor too. Just everything he did kind of showed his character, which made it really believable.
Yeah, there's an authenticity to the character that makes it so relatable and believable to us. Believability is huge. And one of the ways that we can really find that believability when we're thinking of how we can apply this to our own ministries is when you think story, you have to pull from your own life experiences. And that's a lot of things with the life application, especially if you're working kid ministry or if you're doing things with creative ministry, is how can people make this applicable to themselves? And either injecting your own life experience into the story or helping them find how they can identify with the story. A really great example I have from my ministry, there was a year that we did a program where I called it Then and Now. The whole concept was we were sharing events from the Bible, people that were touched by Jesus' ministry. We were trying to bring it into kind of modern day, that Jesus was working then, he's still working now. So what we did is our team took their testimonies and they picked people from the New Testament that were touched by Jesus, and they wove their testimony into that character story. Like one woman we had, she had actually struggled with depression, with suicide. And I said, you know, who do you identify with? Your testimony is really powerful and I'd love to share it. Is there someone there? She said, you know, the woman with the flow of blood. So she wove her story into that. She shared it at church, and it was very powerful. And it was also powerful for us and for people at church, not just because they got to hear her testimony, but also because a lot of times we read about people in the Bible and we think of them as just characters in a story. We don't think of them as real people that walk the earth. And when you're bringing that testimony, that power of what God did in us and putting it into them, into the people from the Bible, then you're giving this sense of reality and a lot of dimension and authenticity to these people that we read about. And it's making you think about them in a different way. And that was really exciting for us to kind of just pull from our life experiences and put that into someone that people have read about so many times. And now it's like, whoa, it's a whole nother level, a whole nother dimension. And I have to keep an eye on the clock. This is usually an hour-long workshop. So we're going to move into story development. So the other part of the quote was telling stories that deeply entertain and move. And let's start with a strong story. That's a huge point with, actually, I don't need to hide that quote. We will keep it up. And I think this is a really, really important point, you know, maybe one of the most important points of the whole workshop for me. But let's have Jeff, if you don't mind reading this quote.
If the story isn't there, all the breakthrough computer graphics in the world piled onto it won't matter. You'll have made a piece of passing fashion.
Yeah. And I think this is especially true. You know, I tend to change it with, I swap out the word story when I think of ministry and I put message. If the message isn't there, all the breakthrough computer graphics, the coolest sets, the most awesome puppets, the flashiest games, none of that's going to matter. You're going to make a piece of passing fashion. You won't do anything that's going to actually transform someone's life. And if, you know, this is the guiding principle that movie studios are using when they're working, how much more of an impetus do we have to really think of our message and making sure it's a strong, precise message? And this is something that's really big with Disney and Pixar. Here's another quote. If we can have JJ read this one.
Strong story will carry weak animation, but the most polished animation can't save a weak story. That's like one of the main driving forces of YouTube, actually.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be, people are making tons of videos and millions of followers with just their phone.
Yeah.
They, the worst quality, but their story is so genuine that it absolutely transcends the quote unquote need for the flashy stuff.
Yeah. And I think a lot of times we worry about our ministry being flashy or being super cool or being super new and modern. But when you really think about it, at the end of the day, it's our passion, it's our message. And if that's really strong, it can still carry everything else. Everything else doesn't have to be as perfect. But if at the end of the day, everything is all flashy and glitter and substance, that's not gonna save a weak message, or in this case, it's not gonna change anyone's life. It's not gonna do anything that's life-changing, life-speaking, life-altering for anyone in the ministry. Anyone want to add anything to that? Any other thoughts?
I mean, I think that's so true. I think we have to be careful not to compare ourselves, and to compare our ministries. I think one of the traps we get caught into a lot of times when we see other people and it seems like they're doing these amazing big things, and we can get tempted to want to make it super flashy and kind of get lost in that,
Yeah.
So I think it's so important that we really focus on content. I know when I'm ministering to children in children's ministry, one thing that I always do is I kind of try to go off and spend my time with God. I take the lesson and I take my time with God. And I say, God, what is it that you want to speak to my heart? Is it something that I need to do to purify myself in regards to this message before I pour it out? Because I really want that content. I want the story to be strong. I want the kids to believe it. And if they don't see that I believe it, then they're not going to believe it, And a way for me to really get into that is to spend time with God,
Yeah.
He creates the story, for me, and then I'm able to go in and basically we're just vessels, Yeah. And I'm able to be basically used by him to do that. And don't get me wrong, I love the glitter, okay? I'm glitter all day.
Most of us do, that's why we're here. This is actually a glitter support group.
you put the glitter and the Spirit of God together. Amazing,
Yeah, absolutely. And then sort of moving along with this thing, going back to this quote that's kind of guiding this idea of story development. What can we observe within, thinking about these movies, it says deeply entertaining and move people. What are we talking about there?
Oh, you're hitting an emotional chord, something that, people can relate to, but it's more than that. It's touching something deep inside us. Whether that's part of the hero and how he changes, or it's his mission, or whatever. There's something in these stories that everybody can just go, oh, that's me.
That they can identify themselves with.
Yeah.
And we're also really talking about balance. It's not just deeply entertaining them, because if you think about these movies, they're so fun. There's so many fun ideas. Like if you think about Zootopia, what is one of the funniest things you can remember from Zootopia?
Oh, the DMV guys.
The DMV. Everybody talks about the DMV. It's genius. But at the same time, they have these really heartfelt moments in there. And it's having that balance in your stories. I'm trying to think of another example. Finding Nemo. What are, super entertaining things that we can think of from those movies?
Turtle, for sure.
The what?
The turtle, the surfer dude, turtle.
Dude.
Everything that comes out of his mouth.
Yeah,
right.
The seagulls, mine. It just makes sense. But at the same time, you think about Finding Nemo, what's the emotional core there?
Oh my goodness, I think I cried through that whole movie.
Finding Dory had me bawling.
That's a very interesting storyline, because the climax of that story you think is when they come together, but it's not. The climax of that story is when he saves Dory, and the point of the whole movie is letting go.
Yeah.
It's letting go. And that is where they're going to, and that's why that coming together moment seems anticlimactic. And when you get to that letting go, I can do it, Dad, I can do it, Dad, because the whole moment we empathize with, what's the dad's name?
Marlin.
Yeah, Marlin. We empathize with Marlin because, especially if you're a parent, you just don't want to let go.
Yeah.
And that moment is the climax there, and it moves us because if you're ever in a situation with letting go of anything in your life, that catches you.
Yeah. And really it's John Lasseter, again, coming back to the guy that originally had the idea of like, hey, we can make a movie with this. He says, for every laugh, there should be a tear. And really, when you think about Disney and Pixar, especially Pixar movies, when they came out, that's really what stood out about them. Usually you think of animated films and people think, oh, it's for kids. But really, adults, you're bringing, unless you're me, you're bringing kids to the theater to watch these movies, but you're getting really moved by them because there's something for everyone. There's those levels to it. There's really that balance that it's not just about fun, but there's also some emotion and there's something that's going to move you. And that's something we remember, because we equally remember all the really hysterical, unique, funny gimmicks within the films, but we also really remember those emotional heart lines. And that's what makes a movie much more memorable. There's lots of other films out there that have lots of laughs, but they don't really have the heart. And I think in ministry, especially, heart should really be what's guiding mostly everything that we're doing. We want the fun too. That sort of leads into the emotional journey. You have a film like Up, and what does everybody think of when they think of Up?
Squirrel. Funerals.
Yeah. Yeah. But it's really such an emotional film. Without giving away spoilers, so I'm not sure how many people are in the workshop that haven't seen Up. But
come on.
I know you haven't seen Up by now. Come on.
But there are people. When I do these workshops, I always ask, who has seen this film? I've been going in with the assumption that you've all seen all of them. But in the workshops, I have some people that they kind of sheepishly, look around like, oh, I haven't seen it. So I've tried to not give spoilers away because I want them to go watch it. But Up is a very emotional journey, and this is something really interesting that I saw in the book about the film. But an old man in a floating house with a wilderness explorer and a talking dog. What are we thinking? Who's going to connect with this? And if you think about it, it sounds so random. It makes very little sense together. But really, what is it that ties it all together? It's me, anyone chiming in.
The relationship between that man and the boy.
Yeah. And even before that, the relationship the man had with his wife, that sort of serves as the impetus for why they even ended up in the situation at all. Kind of going back to finding Nemo, the whole idea of letting go. But there's an emotional beat or an emotional storyline. There's a motivation there that's kind of guiding and pushing the story forward. That's really important. Let me advance slide. Another great example of an emotional journey, we have Toy Story 3. Oh man, I remember when that one came out. Let's have JJ read this quote.
At the end of the day, it's not the technique that the audience cares about. It's a great story, a visual feast, and great characters. They want to be taken on an emotional journey they've never been on before.
Yeah, and I mean, if you think of all these films individually, when was the last time you went in a floating house with balloons, or you went under the sea where you met talking turtles, or I'm trying to think, you went to Paris with a rat that made your meal. It's all very unique concepts. And how can we think of these journeys that have a really strong story, that have something exciting, a visual story? It's different for us where, we're working, usually we're speaking, or we're hopefully using visual tools, because you need those visuals to help people remember. Don't just talk to your audience. And also great characters, where we're really bringing them to life using, the ideas of being appealing, being relatable, and taking these people on a journey they haven't been on before. Another example that I can think of when it comes to ministry, that I heard this idea that I thought was really brilliant. But the whole concept of taking a Bible story and telling it from a point of view of like some third character that nobody really has paid attention to. So someone's like, imagine telling the story of David and Goliath from the Rock's point of view. Or the tale of Jonah and the big fish from the big fish's point of view, where the big fish is telling about that one time that they accidentally swallowed a guy and they got a terrible tummy ache. It's something different. It's something that people can, especially our kids, we all have those kids in our church when we're about to share a story and they're like, we've heard this one, or we know this one already. And how can you take it and flip it and bring the characters to life, bring the people to life, really bring the story to them in a way that's been different, that's going to help them remember it and hopefully identify with it. I don't know if anybody has anything they want to chime in there.
I just need to say that we watched all these Toy Stories, my wife and I, and with my two boys growing up. My son was Woody age when we first saw the first one. In number 3, he went away to college, and that was the year that was the summer my son was going away to college. My wife and I sat in the movie theater for as long as we could and just bawled our eyes out because it really broke us. And matter of fact, when we took my son to school, we had already cried. It was already done. So
you got it all out.
Got it all out.
Yeah, and I think Toy Story 3 is such a great example. For a long time, I was joking that Toy Story is my favorite trilogy, but then they made a 4th one. I'm not complaining about it, but Toy Story 3, especially, like, you know, you think about it, there's some certain scenes in that movie. I won't give away spoilers for those of you that haven't seen Toy Story 3, but there's that one scene that everybody can think of, you know, where they hold hands, and everyone's like, no! And you're just, you know, I was already lightweight bawling in that part, and you really think about it, like, I'm crying over these toys that aren't real. But you really connect with them because you've been on this journey with them. In this case, you know, these Toy Story 3 came out like in late 2000, almost 2010. And, you know, the first one came out 15 or so years before. We've had these relationships with these characters for such a long time that we really do become invested in them. And thinking of ways that we can help the audiences that we're working with, whether it's in KidMin or Creative Min, identify with these characters. It may not be that extreme. You know, one thing to think about is that, you know, we have, you know, the message within our program might be 30, 45 minutes tops. If you're working KidMin, it might be shorter. But, you know, these films, you're in it for 90 minutes or so. So there's a lot more investment within that story, but still thinking of ways that we can build those relationships and help people identify with these characters.
Mm-hmm. One thing about that quote that I actually kind of disagree with, be taken on an emotional journey that I've never been on before. I wouldn't say that I disagree with that so much as I think that there's also a really deep-seated need to be understood. Mm-hmm. And I think that these stories really connect with us in that way. I think that's actually something like Frozen. I mean, that's not Pixar, but I think that's something that Frozen touched on in a way that can't even really be explained, but people really deep down connected with Anna and Elsa. Mm-hmm. And so seeing characters that are going through something that you have gone through, I think can be sort of healing and also really powerful. And if we can take that and include the most important story of all, how powerful is that?
Yeah, definitely.
Hey, is this the time that I can tell you guys that I listened to the Frozen entire soundtrack in the car when the kids are not in the car?
Yeah. It's so good.
Powerful music. And I'm like, yes, into the unknown, Esther.
Show yourself.
That's always a good time to tell us that. And then here's a really great quote. I'm going to ask Christopher to read this one.
Sure. What are you giving the audience to take home? What's the audience going to remember from this film? Not only today, but tomorrow, the next year, their entire life. Usually it's those great emotional moments that lodge in your memory.
And Joe Grant was one of the original Disney animators from like the 40s. Like he was working on Bambi and Pinocchio and, you know, overseeing these really great films. But when we think of this within a ministry lens too, like what are we giving our kids? What are we giving our families to take home? What are they going to remember from our programs? Not just today, but tomorrow, the next year, for the rest of their life. And how do we bring in, maybe not emotionalists, so like we don't need them bawling every single Sunday. You don't want your kids to walk out of service like, but you know, what can we give them that they're going to, what can we plant each week? Or if you're doing, you know, creative ministry programs, you know, however often you do them, but that isn't just fun and entertaining, but that they can kind of plant into their heart and remember. Where are those opportunities? Are they in the story, or is it in ministering to them? Is it in personal moments that you share with them one-on-one? But finding those opportunities where you can really connect with people authentically. And then we're actually technically out of time, but I feel like we can keep going a little bit longer if that's okay.
Keep going.
But creative process, sort of kind of wrapping it up with a couple of key notes. But you know, we've talked about stories, we talked about character. I did also promise that I was going to talk a little bit about creativity and leadership. So these are some quick bullet points because I anticipated I was going to run out of time. I just didn't make full-on slides for these with much more quotes and much more pictures. But one of them is do not work in a vacuum. And that point is huge. If you think about Disney and Pixar, or Disney had the brain trust, and Pixar started this too. It's this idea of these really senior veteran people that would review every single part of the film, and they would give notes and feedback. And this idea that a lot of times in ministry can be really easy for us to work alone. You know, we're going at it alone, we're a lone ranger. But these people are very honest and upfront with them, you know, like, hey, this film, something isn't working in your story. And they're really brutal when they're giving notes, but it's from a sense of, you know, I want it to be the best that it can possibly be, and how important it is for us to find those people that we can trust, that we can share what we're working on with, that can help us in that way. Another point too is surrounding yourself with trusted people, which sort of relates to that, but a really great example I can think of is with The Incredibles. I just read this article a week ago, and I was really excited. I was like, oh, this is perfect timing for my workshop. I had never heard of this story. But when Brad Bird, who was the director of The Incredibles, came into the studio, he had this idea for the superhero movie, and he wanted to do it. And Pixar was like, there's no way we can do this movie. It's going to be way too expensive. It's going to cost, you know, like $500 million. We don't have that kind of money. You know, if you can make it work with this much money, and, you know, maybe we'll do it. So he found a bunch of people in the studio that were kind of frustrated with the way things were, because they had ideas for things they wanted to try, but they weren't given a platform to do it. So he kind of got them together, and he said, you know, I wasn't just looking for people that were angry and frustrated. I was looking for people that were frustrated, but because they cared, and they wanted to do something great. So I told them, hey, we're not going to have a lot of resources. They don't think we can do this, but I think we can do it. And they came together. The film was significantly under budget, and it was huge. I mean, it's genius, this idea of like family dynamics within a superhero family, and how authentic and genuine and relatable that felt. I rewatched The Incredibles as an adult because it came out when I was a teenager, and I was like, whoa, this is touching on some really like deep stuff. But how important it is for us to surround ourselves with people that we can trust. And another lesson there is that just because people are frustrated in ministry, I think we tend to avoid people that are frustrated. We're like, oh, they're Debbie Downers, I don't want to deal with that energy. But a lot of times it's people, it's looking for people that are frustrated because they see something that could be better, and they want it to be better. A lot of times they think people that complain, or that they say things, this is me, my personality, I'm not complaining, but I say things a lot. I offer a lot of feedback. And it's because I care. I won't offer feedback if I don't care about something. I'll just be like, whatever, let the ship sink. That never happens. But I do offer feedback because I care. Another idea, another principle is be wrong as fast as you can. A really great example with this is Frozen. When they were first making the film, one of the early versions of the movie, the idea was that, you know, Anna was going to have blue skin, and she was going to be the mean sister. And after she got, you know, kicked out of Arendelle, she was going to send an army of giant abominable snowmen to destroy the town. And they realized the story wasn't working. So they completely went back, re-scrapped the story, recast, you know, Elsa as a more sympathetic, you know, misunderstood character. They focused on the sister dynamic, and the whole story changed. And how much different would that story have been? And Olaf was originally going to be sort of like a messed up, like, oh, he was like the first guinea pig, and it's not quite the snowman I wanted, so he was like a reject. But how differently would that story have been if they didn't take a step back and say like, oh, this isn't working. Something's not right. Something's not resonating. Something isn't appealing about this character. Something's not relatable. Something isn't going to connect with audiences there. Another point is believe in your ideas. Another great example, I like telling stories about these things because I think they're really interesting. But in The Little Mermaid, what's one of the iconic songs within that movie? There's so many, but you know, one or two of the ones you
can tell you what I'm talking about.
Which one?
The things, the where
Part of Your World.
Yeah, there you go.
Part of Your World. Look at this stuff. Isn't it neat?
And she's totally wrong.
Yeah. Awesome song. You know, it totally made the film. And here's a fun fact. When they were first showing like a test audience the film, that song was in it. It wasn't completely finished with the animation. They just had sort of like the sketches in there and the music, and the kid dropped their popcorn. So one of the producers was like, oh, the song is boring, cut it. And the songwriter was like, no way, you can't cut this. It's so important to the story. They're like, cut it. The kids think it's boring. He dropped his popcorn. So they really, really fought for that song. They won because, you know, we all got to hear that song. But a lot of times we're going to have situations in ministry where we have a really great idea that we believe in, and other people will not. and you need to believe in that idea and push it through. The idea may fail. And that's the reality. Not all of our ideas will be great ideas, but you have to be willing to try. And you also have to have that belief. So it's balancing it out between, you know, listening to people, trusting them, finding out if you're wrong. And sometimes you won't find out until you try it, but you have to be willing to believe in that idea and just go for it. That's the only way you can grow in ministry. If your ministry stays the same, if a year from today, your ministry looks exactly the same as it is today, that is terrifying to me, because it means you're not pushing yourself, you're not growing. And sort of a final point there, and I'll kind of open it up for questions with, if you're watching us on Facebook Live and you have a question or you want to chime in, now's a great time. I feel like I've been having an awesome party with these people on video, and I know you've all been watching attentively. So feel free to start asking questions now, because it takes a couple seconds for us to see it. But the last point is look at the big picture. And there's this really great quote that John Lasseter says, and he says, you know, you're not going to be able to see the whole forest if you're too caught up in the details. You're going to be focusing on the pine needles. And, you know, how often are we caught up in the pine needles, like the minutia of ministry and getting things done, that we're not taking a step back to look at the big picture and see, you know, what are we doing? Why are we doing this? And what impact is it having on the people that we're serving? So that's my challenge and my encouragement to you all. You know, take that. It's hard. It's really hard sometimes to take that step back, but take that step back and try, you know, you don't have to do all of these ideas, but think of, I think a lot of times we go to workshops, we go to conferences, and we get super inspired, but we also get a little discouraged because we're like, oh, all these people are doing amazing things, but I can never do that. And I always tell people, you know, ministry isn't about, and growth isn't about giant leaps and bounds. It's about small steps. There's always a nugget of an idea with everything that you go to, that you can take at least one idea and implement it today. Not we have so many, I mean, we probably have like 20 Pinterest boards and like a bunch of links saved, plus like links I have saved on Facebook of ideas I want to try someday. But they're never gonna get done because they're hidden away, they're gonna get forgotten about. But if you pick one thing that you can do right now, that's what it is to level up in ministry. Pick the one thing, run with it, pick another thing, run with it. There's always something you can apply, and that's gonna take your ministry forward. It's gonna be those little steps each time, and then one day you'll look back and say, whoa, when did I get this far? How did this happen? It's because you took the little steps. It's not because you know, became an Olympic sprinter and then jumped super far in a long jump. Yeah, so we'll see if any questions come in through Facebook, but did you all have any questions or any contributions? Any thoughts?
Be wrong as fast as you can is an amazing quote.
Yeah.
I think so many of us, our whole goal in life is to not be wrong.
Yeah.
And the truth is that it's better to be wrong, but to be wrong quickly and move on.
Fail fast. That's what
fail fast. Exactly.
It's good. It's good.
Yeah, and I mean, no one likes to glorify failure, but that's really how we learn and grow. You know, some people, like my personality, I learn from watching other people. So I see other people's mistakes and I'm like, I don't want to do that. But I also have to try things on my own and see how things will go. So that's really important. Anything else?
Oh my goodness. I just think that this was just so good. I think it's so important that we look at these characters, you know, and I am a big kid. I really am. I'm a big kid. I probably have all of these soundtracks from Pixar, Disney, just everything that I listen to because I have kids and they like them too.
I don't even have kids.
But it is because it has this emotional story to it. And you're so right. You believe that to where you're crying over toys, you know, or fishes in the sea, you know, or mermaids. I don't know if any of you guys believe in mermaids, so I don't want to take down the fantasy, but you know, we're falling for these mermaids because we're really relating them to our own lives. You know, we're seeing ourselves in these characters, and how can we do that and take it into our ministries, you know, so that the children see themselves in these characters, but not just in the character, but they see the bigger picture, you know. So I love this so much.
Amen. Love that. And I think I had a thought and I just lost it. What was I gonna say?
Well, I had a thought. So you come up with
you getting that thought together.
You come up with your thought. I think it was that Joe Rant quote. about story and heart, and it's a bunch of noise if you don't have that. All I could think of was 1 Corinthians 13. If I can speak with the tongue of men and angels, but I don't have love, I'm just a resounding gong or clanging cymbal. And so we've got to keep the gospel at the focus, and that's all about love. It's God's love for us, but then we can be showing that to the kids that are in our ministry and the people that are in our audiences. They need to see that, and so they may see that through the characters that and the stories that we're telling, but they need to see it through us as well. So
amen. I think that's a good note to end on, not to cut anyone off, but we're almost at time. And I have a couple quick questions here through Facebook. Linda's asking, hi, Linda. I would like to hear more about the lady who told her story through the Women with an Issue of Bleeding. How did she do it? So really quick, because I can't go into too much detail with time, but essentially she took her testimony and then she wove aspects of her testimony, not necessarily like actually talking about suicide, but talking about how she felt with depression, how weighed down she felt, and brought that into the basic premise is, she said, I'm this woman that's been suffering for this many years with these many issues, and I heard that this man is coming and that he gave me hope, and then she went to find him. But bringing aspects of her testimony and marrying it with the woman with the flow of blood. So that's sort of how we did that there. Mike Compatillo Sr. says, always remember to include conflict between characters and their traits. It grabs the attention of the audience. And that's so true. We all have flaws. That's a really important thing that we didn't get to touch on it. There's a lot more to this workshop, but for time, I didn't get to include it all. But remember that traits and flaws are just as important as positive attributes. That's what also grabs the attention of your audience and helps them remember and identify with the character. And I think that's all of the questions we have. I want to thank you all so much for joining me. I have some final announcements to share with our viewers and also with you all, I suppose. So the recording of this workshop will be available for 72 hours to watch and share before it's gone. So make sure you share it, let your friends see. Hopefully it was helpful to your ministry and it'll be beneficial. If you haven't yet, please give this workshop, the video itself, a like, comment, let us know where you were watching from and what you thought. And also the organization that put this on, Fellowship of Christian Puppeteers, give them a like as well. If you're a member of Fellowship of Christian Puppeteers, you can access this workshop and all the past workshops at any time on their website. If you'd like to become a member, you can go to christianpuppeteers.org/join, and they have lots of resources that are available to encourage you, whether you're a puppeteer, a creative minister, or a kids minister. And also, if you're looking for more training, our national conference in Maryland will be this July 22nd through 25th. There's gonna be 60 plus workshops, over 4 hours of performances. It's gonna be a really awesome experience that you won't want to miss. I don't just say this as I'm the director of the conference, but it really is. We work really hard to make it an awesome one. And registration opened on January 1st with the biggest savings if you register before February 1st. I think you could save up to $60, $70 something dollars. So registering early is definitely a plus. And you can learn more about that at christianpuppeteers.org/national. I will be at the conference. I will be teaching this workshop. So we'll be diving into it for the full hour with a group of live people. I wish all of these superstars were there too. It'll be a lot of fun. So if you want to talk more about this and dive more into this with me and some other awesome speakers that we have lined up, then I hope you can join us. But thank you all for watching. Thank my friends so much for being here. I'm going to go ahead and close this in prayer, and let's do this. Dear Heavenly Father, we just thank you so much for the opportunity we had to share about 45 minutes together, Lord, just talking about things that we like, Disney and Pixar and movies. Lord, we're just so grateful that you give us the opportunity to have fun while doing ministry. Ministry is hard work, but it can also be so rewarding and so fun. And we just thank you that we have the opportunity to balance that fun, Lord, as well as that life-changing truth that you offer, and the hope, the faith, the love that you want to give your children, your teens, your families, Lord, and everyone that you encounter, that we encounter through our ministries, Lord. I just pray for the people that watch this workshop, as well as my participants. I just thank you for their different ministries and the different amazing work that they're each doing in their home communities. And I just ask you, Lord, to please bless them, encourage them, give them strength, give them vision, give them creativity so that they can continue to move forward, and not just move forward, but blaze forward, Lord, doing what you have planned for them, using their unique abilities and passions, and bringing that into your ministry and doing things for your glory, because we're doing this at the end of the day for you and not just for, not even for us. Thank you so much. Bless this night, bless this week that we have ahead, and thank you. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you all